A billionaire CEO, a single father, a notebook full of secrets. When turbulence forced two strangers together at 30,000 feet, neither of them knew that one conversation would unravel a corporate conspiracy and rebuild two broken lives from the ground up. If you've ever been afraid to start over, this story is for you. Drop a like, comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. Follow along to the very end, because this one doesn't end where you think it will. Logan Pierce had exactly 11 minutes to get to gate 47. He knew this because the departures board said boarding closed at 6:15, his watch said 6:04, and the Seattle flight was at the far end of Terminal B, which was never, under any circumstances, a short walk. He had a rolling carry-on with a busted wheel that kept pulling left, a paper coffee cup that was already going cold, and the specific grinding exhaustion of a man who had been awake since 4:47 in the morning. He was also wearing a sweater that had a small jam stain near the left cuff, courtesy of his daughter Maisie, who had decided at breakfast that the best way to hand someone a spoon was to swing it at them like a pendulum. "You look like you're about to miss a flight," said an airport employee he jogged past. "Working on it," Logan said without breaking stride. He made it, barely. He was the last passenger to board, and the flight attendant near the door gave him the particular smile that airline staff reserve for people who come sprinting down the jetway at the final minute, polite on the surface, something underneath it that was not quite annoyance but adjacent to it. 14C, she said, glancing at his boarding pass. Middle of the row. All the way back. Of course it was. Logan hauled his bag down the aisle, apologizing twice when his broken wheel caught on someone's armrest, and eventually found his seat sandwiched between a heavy-set man already asleep against the window and an empty aisle seat. He crammed his carry-on into the overhead bin, dropped into 14C, and let out a long breath. The Seattle trip was supposed to be simple. 3 days. A meeting with a small press distributor who wanted to partner with the store. Some paperwork. A hotel with complimentary breakfast and maybe, if he was lucky, 8 consecutive hours of sleep, which felt like a fantasy he no longer fully believed in. He pulled out his phone to text his sister Clara, who was watching Maisie for the 3 days he'd be gone. Boarded. "Tell her I'll call from the hotel." Clara's reply came back in under a minute. "She's already asked me 3 times if Daddy misses her yet. I told her yes. Does that count as lying?" Logan smiled at his screen, then put the phone away before the flight attendants started their cabin walkthrough, telling everyone to switch to airplane mode. The seat beside him, 14B, was still empty when the doors closed. He was just beginning to allow himself the small luxury of thinking he might have extra elbow room for the flight when footsteps came fast down the aisle, and a woman dropped into the seat beside him with slightly more force than was strictly necessary. She was young, late 20s maybe. Dark hair pulled into a low ponytail that had started the day neat and was now loosening around the edges. She wore a gray blazer over a plain black shirt, dark pants, and no jewelry except a simple watch on her left wrist. No designer bag, no laptop branded with company stickers, no headphones that cost more than Logan's monthly grocery bill. Just a worn leather notebook tucked under her arm and a small backpack she shoved under the seat in front of her. She stared straight ahead while the flight attendants began their safety demonstration. Logan looked back at his book, a worn paperback thriller he'd been meaning to finish for 3 months, and said nothing. This was, he would think later, the most normal beginning to a story he had ever been part of. Logan Pierce was 30 years old and had been a father for 7 years, which meant he had been a father since he was 23, which meant he had been a father since roughly 6 weeks after he and his college girlfriend discovered that the responsible thing to do wasn't always the easy thing to do, and that sometimes the thing you weren't ready for turned into the only thing you couldn't imagine living without. Her name had been Rachel. She'd had dark eyes and a habit of folding her napkin into elaborate shapes when she was thinking hard about something. She had been funny in a dry, quiet way that most people missed if they weren't paying attention. She died 2 months after Maisie's 2nd birthday from an aggressive form of leukemia that moved faster than anything the doctors had prepared them for. Logan had spent the following year doing the only thing he knew how to do when the ground wasn't solid, which was work. He got a job managing a neighborhood bookstore in Portland, Oregon, a place called Halcyon Books, that smelled like old paper and wood polish, and was owned by a 70-year-old man named Gerald who believed strongly in independent publishing and weak coffee. He put Maisie in daycare. He paid his bills. He kept moving. Maisie was 7 now. She was gap-toothed and stubborn and had her mother's eyes and apparently her mother's talent for pointing out when Logan was being emotionally avoidant, which she did with the unsettling directness that only small children and very old therapists seem capable of. Last month, she had watched him turn down an invitation to a coworker's birthday gathering and then looked at him and said, with no particular emotion, "You always say no to things." He had said, "I'm tired, Bug," and she had said, "You're always tired," and gone back to her drawing, and he had stood in the kitchen for a long moment feeling like he'd been handed a mirror he didn't ask for. He was thinking about that now, somewhere over Northern California, not really reading his book, when the woman beside him shifted. She had been still the entire flight. Headphones in, cheap ones, the earbuds you get free on flights, not anything she'd brought herself. Eyes forward, hands folded in her lap over the leather notebook. Not sleeping, not reading. Just sitting very quietly in a way that Logan thought was not actually restful. It was the kind of stillness that was one layer over something else. He'd seen it before, the particular quality of someone holding themselves in place. Then the plane hit turbulence. It wasn't the gentle rocking kind. It was a sudden, hard drop, the kind that sounds like the plane has struck something, where the overhead bins rattle and someone in the back row yelps, and the coffee in Logan's cup sloshed sideways. The seatbelt sign had already been on for 10 minutes after a lighter batch of bumping, but this was different. This was the kind that makes your stomach go hollow. The plane leveled out, then dropped again. The lights flickered once. Logan grabbed his armrest and recalculated, mentally, whether the seatbelt he'd never taken off was tight enough. Beside him, the woman made a sound. It wasn't loud. It was the kind of sound you try to suppress and don't quite manage. A short, sharp inhale that was more than just surprise. He glanced over. Her hands were gripping the notebook in her lap hard enough that the knuckles had gone pale. Her eyes were closed. Her jaw was set in the specific way of someone who has decided they will not embarrass themselves and is currently losing that decision. The plane bucked again, something rattled in the overhead, and her grip on the notebook tightened further. "Hey," Logan said, keeping his voice even. "It's okay. This is normal." She didn't open her eyes. "I know it's normal." "Do you? Because you're holding that notebook like it owes you money." That startled a breath out of her. Not quite a laugh, but close. Her hands didn't loosen. "I've been on 50 flights this year," she said through her teeth. "I'm not afraid of flying." "Sure. I'm not. I believe you. I just—" The plane shuddered again, a long rolling sway that felt slower and somehow worse than the abrupt drops, and whatever she'd been about to say got swallowed. Her shoulders came up toward her ears. Logan thought about Maisie. Maisie was terrified of thunderstorms, and had been since she was 4, and the thing that helped was never telling her the storm was nothing, because she could hear the thunder perfectly well and she knew it was something. The thing that helped was talking about something else, giving her brain somewhere different to go. "My daughter is 7, he said. "She has an imaginary best friend who is a moth." A pause. "A moth?" "Named Gerald, after my boss. She's never met my boss, she just liked the name." The woman's eyes opened slightly. "Why a moth?" "I asked her that. She said moths are misunderstood because everyone talks about butterflies and moths are just as good, but they come out at night so nobody pays attention. I told her that was a pretty good point. She said she knows." Another turbulence shudder. Smaller this time. The woman exhaled. "She sounds very confident," she said. "She's terrifyingly confident. She corrected her teacher's math last week, in front of the whole class. The teacher was actually wrong, which Maisie has not let go of." The plane leveled. The lights steadied. The seatbelt sign was still on, but the violent movement had passed, and the flight attendants in the back began moving again, which Logan knew from experience was a reliable indicator that they were through the worst of it. The woman beside him let out a long, slow breath. Her hands finally relaxed on the notebook. She pulled the earbuds out with one hand and dropped them onto the tray table. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't—" She stopped. Started again. I'm not usually like this. You don't have to apologize. I was embarrassing. You were scared. Different thing. She looked at him then, for the first time properly. She had brown eyes, a little tired around the edges. Up close, she looked less put together than she had at boarding, or rather, she looked like someone who was usually very put together and was currently not pulling it off the way she wanted to. The moth, she said. Gerald. Gerald the moth. Does she know moths eat wool? Logan blinked. I have not told her that. Probably don't lead with that. He laughed. It came out more genuine than he expected, the kind of laugh that happens before you decide whether or not to laugh. She seemed surprised by it, or maybe surprised that she'd said something that caused it. A small change in her expression, something that had been drawn tight, loosening just slightly. I'm Logan, he said. A beat, like she was deciding something. Sienna, she said. They talked for the remaining 40 minutes of the flight, which Logan would not have predicted at the start of it. It didn't happen all at once. It was the way conversations go when neither person is trying to have a conversation, one thing leading to another, the strange freedom of talking to a stranger you will never see again, making it easier to be honest about small things. She asked about the bookstore. He told her about Halcyon, about the way Gerald, the actual Gerald, had a policy of refusing to stock anything he personally found unreadable, which had created some memorable confrontations with sales reps over the years, and about the regulars who came in every Saturday and the kids who treated the back corner reading nook like it was their personal property. You like it, she said, not as a question. It's not, He stopped. It's not what I thought I'd be doing at 30. But yeah, I like it. What did you think you'd be doing? He considered lying, not because the truth was embarrassing, but because he was used to keeping things short with strangers. Then he said, I thought I'd be in publishing, editing. I was in a graduate program for it when things changed. She didn't push. He appreciated that. What do you do? He asked. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, Tech. I run a company. The way she said it, the particular lack of elaboration, was the answer of someone who gets a certain reaction when they give more details and has gotten tired of managing that reaction. Logan noted it and moved on. Do you like it? She turned to look at the window for a moment. Outside, there was only cloud cover and the last light of the evening going dim at the horizon. I did, she said. At the start. I really did. She said it the way people say things that are true and also hurt a little to say out loud. Logan didn't push either. They didn't exchange numbers when the plane landed. That wasn't what the conversation was. It was the kind of thing that happens at 30,000 feet and stays there. One of those encounters that is complete in itself, a clean parenthesis that opens and closes without needing to be anything more. Logan got his bag down from the overhead bin, told Sienna it was good to meet her, and meant it. She said the same, and he believed her. He made it to the jetway before he realized he had left his paperback in the seat pocket. He went back for it, squeezing past the last of the deplaning passengers, reached into the pocket, and found his book, and tucked behind it something that wasn't his. A leather notebook. He picked it up. It was the one she had been clutching during the turbulence. Same worn cover, same slight curl at the bottom right corner where she'd bent the spine. She must have left it in her rush to get off. He looked up. The plane was almost empty. She was already gone. Logan stood there for a second, holding the notebook, thinking the sensible thing was to hand it to the flight attendant at the door and let the airline figure it out. That was the practical thing, the simple thing. He looked down at the notebook, at the way the cover was worn soft from a lot of handling. Whatever was in this clearly mattered to her. He tucked it under his arm and went after her. Seattle-Tacoma International Airport at 7:30 in the evening was exactly what you would expect. A dense, moving crowd of people pulling luggage and staring at phones, the overhead signs pointing in 4 directions at once, the particular ambient roar of an airport in full operation. Logan came off the jetway, turned in a full circle, and saw no sign of her. She had a head start. She'd been moving quickly when they landed. He started walking fast in the direction of the main terminal, scanning the crowd. At his height, just under 6 feet, he had some advantage, but not much when 1,000 other people were also moving through the same space. He tried to think logically. She'd said tech. She was clearly traveling for business, not leisure. No personal luggage beyond the backpack. No vacation energy in her posture. That blazer that was practical, but not comfortable. Business traveler. She'd be going for ground transport, or the rideshare pickup area, maybe a corporate car. He veered toward the main exits, still scanning. He almost missed her. She was standing to one side of the main corridor, slightly behind a support column, and the reason Logan spotted her was because of the two men. They were standing maybe 20 feet from her, but the way they were positioned, not looking at phones, not moving, just standing in a space that was meant for moving through, made the back of Logan's neck prickle. They were looking at the crowd in a specific way, like they were looking for someone. Sienna was watching them from behind the column. Logan altered course without really deciding to. He walked casually, not straight toward her, angling over like a man who had just noticed a gate sign and changed his mind. He came up beside her from an angle that kept him in her peripheral vision. "Your notebook," he said quietly, and held it out. She looked at him, then at the notebook. Something passed over her face. Relief, but tangled up with something else. "You ran after me," she said. "It seemed like it mattered." He glanced briefly at the two men. They hadn't spotted her yet, or didn't seem to. "Do you know them?" She didn't answer the question directly. "I can't take the car I was supposed to take," she said. Her voice was steady but clipped, the voice of someone running scenarios very quickly. "I need to think." "Okay." "You should go. You don't want to be involved in—" She stopped. "In what?" She looked at him. She looked like someone who was extremely good at not showing what she was thinking, and was currently failing at that. "How long is your layover?" she asked. "Not a layover. I'm here for 3 days." "Do you have somewhere to be right now?" He had a hotel. He had no meeting until tomorrow morning at 10. He looked at the two men by the column. He looked back at Sienna. "Not immediately," he said. She held the notebook a little tighter, the way she had on the plane. Then she made a decision. He could see it, the exact moment she made it, the small change in her expression where something settled. "There's a coffee place on the lower level," she said. "Follow me, but not right next to me. Come in 2 minutes after." She turned and walked away without waiting for his answer. Logan stood there for a beat, holding his carry-on with the bad wheel, wearing a sweater with a jam stain on the cuff, in an airport he did not live in. He followed her. The coffee place on the lower level was a small, unremarkable chain cafe with hard plastic chairs and a line of 4 people. Sienna was already at a corner table when Logan came in, her back to the wall in a way that gave her a line of sight to the entrance. The notebook was on the table in front of her hands flat on either side of it. Logan bought 2 coffees he didn't need because walking in and sitting down immediately seemed too pointed, and because he had been awake since 4:47 and the coffee might help. He set one in front of her. She looked at it, then up at him. "You didn't have to do that. I figured we might be here a minute." She wrapped both hands around the cup. Didn't drink it, just held it. He recognized that move. The thermal comfort of it. The thing your body does when your nerves are running. "The men upstairs," she said. "Do you know who hired security like that?" "No." "Corporate security, the kind that doesn't carry visible ID. Who hired them?" She looked at her coffee cup. Then she said flatly, like she had rehearsed it, "My board of directors." Logan waited. "I run a company called Vela Technologies," she said. "Software infrastructure, mid-market. About 4 years old, 600 employees, currently valued at $2.3 billion. She said the number, the way people who grew up without money say numbers like that. A little fast, a little like they're still not sure it's real. 3 months ago, a private equity group approached us about an acquisition. My board wants to take the deal. I don't. Why not? Because the acquiring company has a history of gutting the operations teams of every company it buys. They keep the IP and they lose the people. And I started this company with the people." She paused. "And because in the 4 years I've been doing this, I've been running a secondary project, a foundation, libraries, community learning centers, mostly in lower income areas where kids don't have access to the kind of tools they need. I've been quietly moving a portion of company revenue into the groundwork for that. The board knows about it. They don't care, as long as it doesn't impact the valuation. Another pause, shorter. But the acquisition would dissolve the foundation, contractually. I've read the paperwork 4 times. Logan looked at the notebook. Is that what's in there? Partly. She opened it, not all the way, and Logan caught a glimpse of what was inside. Not spreadsheets or dense financial notes. He saw a sketch, a building sketch, rough and penciled with handwriting along the margins. The plans for the first 5 locations. I started drawing them on flights mostly, when I can't sleep. She closed the notebook again. The other part of what's in here is different. I've been aware for about 6 weeks that someone on my board has been misrouting funds. Not company funds, quas investor funds. Pre-allocation, before anything hits the books in a traceable way. The amounts are significant. How significant? She told him. Logan put his coffee down. And you have evidence of this, he said. I have enough to start a serious investigation. Not enough to be bulletproof, not yet. I've been gathering it carefully because if I move too early and they find out, it disappears, and I disappear with it. Professionally. She held the notebook a little closer. 3 days ago, someone I trusted told them I had documentation. I don't know who told them. I don't know how much they know I have. I do know that I was supposed to have a driver pick me up from the airport tonight through the company account, and I changed my mind about that at the last minute because something felt wrong. Logan thought about the 2 men upstairs standing still in a moving crowd. Something was wrong, he said. Yes. She looked at him directly. I'm sorry to put this in front of you. You were kind to return the notebook. You could leave right now, and I would completely understand that. Logan thought about Maisie, about Clara texting him pictures in an hour, about the hotel and the breakfast meeting and the small, stable life he had built very carefully around the perimeter of his grief. He thought about how he had told himself for 5 years that stability was enough, that keeping things small and controlled was the reasonable way to live, that the best thing he could do for Maisie was never let anything risky get close to them. He also thought about the way Sienna had looked when he'd handed her the notebook, that expression that was relief and something else. The something else that looked like she hadn't expected anyone to run after her. What do you need right now, he said. Practically, tonight. She blinked, like the question was unexpected. I need somewhere to think that isn't a company-arranged hotel room, she said slowly. I need to make 3 calls without worrying about the phone being monitored. I have my personal phone, not the company one, and I need to... She stopped. I need someone who isn't in my world right now, someone who doesn't have a stake in any of this. A neutral party. Something like that. Logan looked at her. I'm in a Marriott off 5th, he said. I have no idea what any of this corporate stuff involves, and I have no stake in your world. There's a business center lounge on the 3rd floor that I'm pretty sure is empty at this time of night. She stared at him. He stopped. I'm not offering anything beyond a safe place to make phone calls and have someone who's not connected to any of this site nearby. That's it. She looked at him for a long moment with an expression that was harder to read. Not suspicious exactly, but careful. The look of someone who had been in situations where people offered help, and there was always a reason for the help. Then she seemed to arrive somewhere. Okay, she said. They took separate rideshare cars, Logan's idea. She'd raised her eyebrow at it, and he'd said, if someone's watching the rideshare pickups, 2 people getting in the same car is more memorable than 2 people getting in different ones. And she'd said, you're not what I expected. And he'd said, that's a low bar. And she'd actually smiled. A real one, brief but genuine, before turning away. In the car, Logan texted Clara, going to be in later than I thought. Let Maisie stay up an extra half hour if she wants. Then he sat with his hands on his knees and thought about what he was doing. He was doing something reasonably strange. He knew that. A man with a bookstore and a 7-year-old and a jam stain on his cuff, getting involved in something that involved board members and misrouted investor funds and 2 men standing very still in an airport terminal. But there was something else he kept coming back to. That sound she'd made on the plane during the turbulence. The one she'd tried to suppress. Not just physical fear, not just the instinctive clench of someone afraid the plane would fall. Something underneath that. The sound of someone who had been holding a great deal together for a long time and was feeling the weight of it. He recognized that sound. He had made it himself, in the first year after Rachel, alone in the kitchen after Maisie was asleep, quietly and privately. So it would be over before morning. He wasn't trying to save anyone. He knew that. He also knew that sometimes the most human thing you could do was simply stay nearby when someone was having a hard night. The hotel was quiet when he arrived. The third-floor lounge was, as he'd guessed, empty. Chairs and low tables and a coffee machine that looked like it had seen better decades, but private and out of the way. Sienna arrived 12 minutes after him. She'd redone her ponytail in the car, he noticed, reassembled the put-together version of herself. But there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there on the plane, and she moved like someone who was tired all the way down. She sat across from him, put the notebook on the table and said, "Can I ask you something first?" "Sure." "Why are you doing this?" It wasn't quite a question. She was looking at him steadily, trying to figure out what she was missing. "I don't have a great answer," Logan said. "Mostly I think you had a bad night and didn't have anyone to call who wasn't complicated." "That's it?" "That's most of it." He thought for a second. "Also, my daughter told me recently that I always say no to things. I'm trying to notice when I do that." Sienna looked at him. "Your daughter sounds extremely wise," she said. "She's 7 and she thinks moths are misunderstood. But yeah." He leaned back in his chair. "Make your calls." She did. He sat with his cold coffee and his paperback he wasn't reading, and he listened to the half of the conversations he could hear. Clipped, controlled, the voice of someone who had been doing this long enough that even when things were falling apart, she spoke in complete sentences. He could see her working through it, adjusting, thinking 3 steps ahead. Around 10:30, she put the phone down and leaned her head back against the chair and looked at the ceiling. "My CFO knows something's wrong," she said to the ceiling. "He won't say it directly. He's too scared to say it directly." "Is he involved?" "No, he's just not brave." She looked back down. "That's most people, isn't it? Not malicious, just not brave." Logan thought about that. "Most people," he agreed. "Not all." She looked at him with an expression that was, for the first time, not measured or managed or careful. Just a person sitting in a quiet hotel lounge in Seattle at 10:30 at night, running out of steam. "I started this company because I wanted to prove something was possible," she said. "Not to the investors, not to the board. I wanted to show that you could build something real and still put it in service of something that actually matters. Libraries, books, kids who don't have the right starting conditions getting the tools they need." She touched the cover of the notebook. "I know how that sounds. I know the version of it that's a press release. That's not what it sounds like. You haven't seen the notebook." "I saw part of it, in the seat pocket." She was quiet for a moment. "My mother worked nights," she said, "when I was growing up. She would bring me to the public library on her days off, and we'd stay for hours because it was the one place where everything was available and nothing cost anything. That's where I learned to read properly. That's where I figured out there was a world bigger than the one I was in." She touched the notebook again. "That's what I want to build. More of those. Everywhere I can reach." Logan didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "I work in a bookstore." She looked at him. He saw the moment she understood what he meant. Not the literal fact of it, but the connective tissue of it. The thing the fact was pointing at. "Yeah," he said simply. "I know what you're talking about." Something in her face changed again. Not the brief smile from earlier. Something quieter and less guarded than that. The kind of change in an expression that happens when you say something real and find out it was received. They sat in the quiet lounge until past midnight, Logan eventually giving up on pretending to read and instead talking, not about the board or the notebook or the men in the airport, but about other things. About what makes a good neighborhood bookstore different from a chain. About Portland in November, which is gray in a way that's either depressing or beautiful, depending on the year. About what Maisie had said last month that Logan had turned over in his mind a dozen times since. You always say no to things. Sienna talked about her first office, which had been a shared space in a building that smelled perpetually of someone else's lunch. About the first hire she'd made, a developer named Marcus who had turned down 3 better-paying offers to join a startup that could have failed in 6 months, and how she had thought about that decision almost every week since. About how the version of her life that looked impressive from outside bore approximately no relationship to what it felt like from inside. When she finally said she should get some sleep, she looked different from the woman who had dropped into the airplane seat beside him 5 hours ago. Not lighter, exactly, but less like someone holding everything in place by force. "Thank you," she said, at the door of the lounge. "Don't thank me, I just sat here." "You sat here," she said. "Most people would have handed the notebook to the flight attendant." He had almost done that. He didn't say so. "Get some sleep," he said. She left. Logan sat alone in the lounge for a few more minutes, looking at the coffee machine and the empty chairs. His phone buzzed. "Clara, Maisie asked me to tell you that Gerald the Moth says goodnight." He laughed out loud, alone in an empty hotel lounge in Seattle, a tired man with a jam stain on his cuff in the middle of something he didn't fully understand. He sat with it for a moment. Then he texted back, "Tell her I'll be home in 3 days, and tell her Gerald is a good moth." He turned off the light and headed for his room. Logan slept badly. This was not unusual. He slept badly most nights, had since Rachel, his body running some background process that never fully shut down. But the particular flavor of this bad sleep was different. Not the old grief insomnia where his mind circled the same small radius. This was something more external, a low-level alertness he couldn't switch off, like a smoke detector with a dying battery, not quite alarming, just present enough to keep dragging him back to the surface. He lay in the hotel room at 2 a.m, staring at the ceiling and running through the evening the way you run through something you're not sure you understood correctly. 2 men standing still in a moving airport. Corporate security, she'd called them. The kind without visible ID. A board of directors who wanted a deal she wouldn't sign. Missing investor funds. And a notebook full of library sketches that a 30-year-old tech billionaire had been quietly drawing on overnight flights. He thought about the way she'd held the notebook during the turbulence before she had any reason to be afraid of anything on the ground. Like she'd been holding it for a long time. He told himself it wasn't his situation. He had a breakfast meeting at 10. He had a daughter in Portland who was sleeping next to a stuffed moth named Gerald. He had a bookstore that needed him back by Friday. He fell asleep somewhere after 3 and woke up at 7 feeling like he hadn't. Well, the text came at 8:14 while he was standing at the bathroom sink with a toothbrush in his hand. "It's Sienna. I got your number from the hotel guest system. I'm sorry for that. I asked the front desk to message you, and apparently they just gave them my request directly. I need to talk to you before you go to your meeting. Lobby coffee, 8:30 if you can." Logan looked at his reflection for a moment. He typed back, "I'll be there." She was already at a table when he came down. Same blazer as yesterday, a different shirt underneath, her hair back in the same low ponytail. She had a coffee in front of her, and a second one across the table that she'd clearly ordered for him, and she looked like someone who had also not slept. "The front desk shouldn't have given you my room information," he said, sitting down. "I know, I'm sorry. I told them it was urgent." "It's okay. I'm not. It's fine." He picked up the coffee. "What happened?" She turned her phone to face him. A news article, time-stamped 6:48 a.m. The headline read, "Vela Technologies CEO Sienna Hart under fire. As investor complaint filed over foundation fund diversion." Logan read it once. Then he read the first 3 paragraphs again more carefully. The story claimed that Sienna had been redirecting company funds into a personal foundation without full board approval, and that at least one significant investor had filed a formal complaint with the SEC. It quoted 2 unnamed sources inside the company. It had a photo of her from a conference event, the kind of shot that was flattering in context and unflattering cropped the way they had it. "This came out this morning," she said. "Is any of it true?" "The foundation exists. The funding structure was disclosed to the board 18 months ago. 2 of them signed off on it." She said it calmly, but the calm was effortful, the kind that comes from having already had the panic privately. "The framing is the lie. The framing makes it look like I went around them. I didn't. I went through the proper process, and then later, when they decided the acquisition was more important, they started rewriting the history of that process. And the investor complaint? I don't know who filed it. I have 3 guesses." She put the phone down. "There will be more stories. This is the first one. They're testing how it lands before they decide how far to push it. Logan thought about that. The deliberate architecture of it, the single story first, watching the reaction. How many board members are involved in this, he said. 3, I think. Possibly 4. One of them, a man named Douglas Carr, has been on the board since the beginning. He brought in 2 of the other members 2 years ago when we had a capital round. That's when the acquisition conversation started. She wrapped her hands around her cup. The financial misconduct I've been tracking, the misrouted funds, that's Carr. It's not a small amount and it's not sloppiness. It was deliberate and it was structured to be hard to trace. But you traced it. Partially. I have a pattern. I have 3 transactions I can document cleanly. For a full picture, I need access to a secondary account that was set up through a shell entity, and I've been trying to get the documentation on that for 2 weeks through legitimate channels, and they keep... She stopped. The requests keep getting rerouted, which means someone in the finance infrastructure knows I'm looking. Logan turned his coffee cup in his hands. You need someone to get that documentation who isn't you and isn't connected to the company. She looked at him. I'm a bookstore manager, he said flatly. I know. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal, she said. The documentation I need is held by a third-party accounting firm that Carr brought in 2 years ago. Their compliance office is required to respond to formal written requests from company executives. I have executive standing, I can send the request. But if I send it from my company email or my name, it gets flagged immediately, and Carr's people get to it first. She paused. If the request goes through a communications channel they're not watching, like a personal email from a private individual who has no connection to Vela, requesting records on behalf of a client, framed as a legal inquiry. Logan sat back. You want me to send an email? I want to use your email address. You wouldn't be making any false claims. The request would be factually accurate. You would be acting on behalf of a principal. It's not technically an attorney-client framing. It's more of a Sienna. Procedural workaround. Sienna. She stopped. Take a breath, he said. She did, a visible one. The kind that happens when someone has been talking fast, because if they stop talking, the anxiety catches up. I know this is a lot, she said. I know this is not your problem. I know you came to Seattle to talk to a book distributor, and I have dragged you into something that has nothing to do with your life. You didn't drag me. I followed you into the coffee place. You were being kind. And now I'm making an informed decision, he said, which is different. He looked at the news article still visible on her phone screen. Tell me exactly what the email needs to say. The business meeting at 10 was with a man named Phil Grantham, who distributed small press titles to independent retailers up and down the Pacific Northwest, and who had a genuinely good handshake and the kind of low-key enthusiasm for physical books that Logan found both professionally useful and personally reassuring. They met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the hotel and talked for 90 minutes about consignment terms and a regional author event series that Halcyon was considering. And for that 90 minutes, Logan was entirely present and entirely himself. The bookstore version of himself, the one who knew what he was doing and felt competent at it. Then Phil left, and Logan walked back to the hotel, and he sat on the edge of his bed and sent an email from his personal Gmail account to the compliance department of a firm called Meridian Accounting Group on behalf of a principal with executive standing at Vela Technologies, requesting specific financial records pertaining to a secondary account under a named shell entity, referencing the appropriate regulatory code that Sienna had made him copy exactly. He felt strange sending it, not guilty. Nothing in the email was false, and Sienna had been right that it was technically clean, but it was the feeling of a person who has spent years making small, careful decisions suddenly doing something that didn't fit the small, careful category. He sent it. Then he sat there for a minute. Then he called Clara. Hey, she said. Maisie's at school. Everything okay? Yeah, fine. Pause. He stopped. Started again. Am I a no-to-things person? A beat. Well, Clara said. Clara. I mean, you're not a yes-to-things person. You're more of a... She seemed to choose her words carefully. A let me check the calendar and get back to you person. That's just being organized. Logan, you checked the calendar before agreeing to come to Thanksgiving at our parents' house, where you grew up. He didn't have a good response to that. Why are you asking? Clara said. Someone said something. What someone? You don't have someone. It's not a... He stopped. Someone I met on the flight. It's not a thing, Clara. You met someone on a flight. It's complicated. She's having a hard week. She? So there's a she. Clara, I'm just saying, you called me to ask if you're a no to things person, which means something is making you want to say yes to something, which I'll talk to you later, Logan said, and hung up. He lay back on the hotel bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about how Clara was, unfortunately, exactly right, the way she was about most things involving his emotional life. Sienna had a secure working space at a small shared office facility downtown, nothing connected to Vela. She'd set it up 6 weeks ago, she told him, when she first started realizing what she was dealing with. She'd paid for it personally, through a sub-account that didn't have her name on the front-facing paperwork. Logan met her there that afternoon. The space was a single room with a desk, a decent internet connection, and a window that looked at the side of a parking structure. Not impressive. Exactly the point. She had 2 laptops open when he arrived. One had a financial spreadsheet across the screen that meant nothing to him, and the other had what looked like a chain of internal emails. Meridian acknowledged the request, she said, without looking up. 4 hours? That's faster than I expected. Is that good or bad? Unclear. She finally looked up. It means someone saw it and flagged it for attention. Whether that attention is from the compliance side or from Carr's contacts there, I won't know until I see what they send back. How long will that take? If they're running clean, 3 to 5 business days. If Carr has a contact there, could be never, or could be they send something incomplete that's designed to look like compliance. She turned back to the screen. In the meantime, I've been going through these. She nodded at the email chain. Internal communications from 8 months ago, before the acquisition conversations went formal. Someone on the board was communicating with the acquiring group's representative before the rest of the board was informed that discussions were happening. That's a material conflict of interest issue. Logan pulled a chair over and sat. Can you prove it? With these emails, yes, provisionally. The problem is provenance. I access these through my own company system, which means Carr's legal team will argue I cherry-picked them or altered them. She leaned back in her chair. I need an independent witness to the original files. A lawyer. A very specific kind of lawyer. Not the company's. They're conflicted. Someone external, with standing to certify that what I have is unaltered. Do you have someone? I have a name. Someone I went to school with who went into securities law. I haven't called her yet because I didn't want to do it from a compromised line. She glanced at him. I used your hotel Wi-Fi this morning for the accounting email. I'll use this line for the call. Okay. She picked up her phone, looked at the contact, and then put it back down without dialing. Logan watched her. What? He said. Nothing. You put the phone down. She was quiet for a second, then, calling her makes it real in a different way. Right now I have evidence and I have a plan. Once I call a lawyer, I'm filing. That's a different thing. He understood that. The difference between having the courage to do something and the moment you actually do it, the specific gap between those two things that is sometimes harder than either one. What happens if you don't call her? He said. I know what happens. Say it out loud. She looked at him. Then she said quietly, Carr gets ahead of the story. The foundation gets dissolved as part of the acquisition terms. The people who were counting on me to hold the line end up with nothing. And the man who's been stealing from investors keeps his position and his reputation and walks away clean. She picked up the phone. And I spend the rest of my career knowing I had the documentation, and I blinked. She dialed. Logan listened to her leave a voicemail. Measured, specific, calm. When she hung up, she set the phone face down on the desk and let out a long breath. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They sat in the quiet for a minute. Outside the window, the parking structure. Across the desk, 2 laptops with problems on their screens that Logan could barely parse, and Sienna had been living inside of for months. Can I ask you something? He said. You can ask. Why are you trusting me? It came out more direct than he intended, but he let it stand. You don't know me. I followed you into a coffee place at an airport. I have no standing in any of this. Why not call someone who actually knows your world? Sienna was quiet for a moment. She looked at the window. Because everyone who knows my world has a position in it, she said finally. My executives are scared. My investors are watching the valuation. My lawyers are conflicted. My friends, she stopped. My friends are mostly people I met through work, which means they're not actually separate from any of this. She turned back to look at him. You don't have anything to gain or lose. You're just a person. Just a person, he repeated. I mean that as a compliment. He believed her. For what it's worth, he said, you don't seem like what I'd have guessed a tech billionaire looked like. What would you have guessed? Someone who doesn't hold their coffee cup with both hands. Someone who doesn't draw library sketches in a notebook on overnight flights. He paused. Someone who doesn't almost cry on a plane and then make a pretty good moth joke 45 seconds later. She looked at him for a moment. That was a moth joke in self-defense, she said. You led with it. I did. It was effective, she admitted. Gerald gets results. The tension in her face broke slightly. Not a full smile, but the possibility of one. The shape of it around the corners of her mouth. It changed her whole face, the way it had on the plane. Like something underneath the CEO armor surfacing briefly, the person who had grown up in libraries and drawn buildings and notebooks, and actually meant the things she said she meant. Logan looked away before he was obvious about it. My daughter would have questions about you, he said, aiming for neutral ground. Questions like what? Like why you don't just tell the bad guys that they're wrong and they have to stop. That's usually her first suggested solution. That's actually not far off from what I'm trying to do, Sienna said. She'd appreciate that. Another small silence, different in texture from the earlier ones, less weight in it. His phone buzzed. He glanced down, a number he didn't recognize. Portland area code. He looked at it for a second, then let it go to voicemail. Then it buzzed again. Same number. He frowned. Sorry. He answered it. Mr. Pierce? A woman's voice, professional but clipped. This is Ellen Marsh calling from Halcyon Books. Gerald asked me to reach you. There's been a man in the store asking questions about you this morning. He claimed to be an old friend. Gerald didn't believe him and asked him to leave, but he wanted you to know. Logan went very still. Questions about what specifically, he said. Your trip, where you were staying, whether you were traveling alone. A brief pause. Gerald was quite firm with him, but he said the man seemed to already know you were in Seattle. Logan kept his voice level. Thank you, Ellen. Tell Gerald I'll call him later. He hung up. Sienna was watching him. They know your name, she said. It was not a question. Apparently. He sat with that for a second. The particular cold quality of it, his bookstore, his life, the life he had built small and careful and separate, being touched by something he'd walked into 40 hours ago in an airport. Logan, it's okay. It's not okay. They shouldn't, you're not. She stopped. He could see her doing the calculation, the specific guilt of someone who has brought consequences down on someone who hadn't signed up for them. I'm sorry. I didn't think they'd go that far. You're not part of this. He thought about that. He thought about a woman holding a notebook with white knuckles at 30,000 feet. About library sketches. About investor funds being quietly stolen by a man in a suit who counted on everyone being just scared enough to look away. He thought about what Clara had said. You're more of a let me check the calendar and get back to you person. I think, Logan said slowly, that I'm a little bit part of this now. She looked at him with an expression that was complicated. Gratitude, guilt, and something softer than either. You don't have to be, she said. I know, he said. That's the point. He picked up his coffee, which had gone cold again, and drank it anyway. The call to Gerald came at 6:47 that evening. Logan sitting on the edge of his hotel bed with the window going dark behind him, and Seattle doing what Seattle does in the fall, which is rain quietly and without apology. Gerald Hatch was 70 years old and had owned Halcyon Books for 31 of those years, and had a voice that sounded like gravel, filtered through patience. He picked up on the second ring. "The man came in at 11, Gerald said, without preamble. "Well-dressed, not local, I can tell local. He asked Ellen at the register if the manager was in. She said no, you were traveling. He asked where. She said she didn't know, which was smart of her. Then he said something like, 'Oh, Logan and I go way back,' and smiled in a way that Ellen described as professional, which is her word for fake. I came out from the back and he asked me the same things again." "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were on a buying trip and I didn't know your itinerary, and that if he was a friend of yours he could try your cell." A pause. "He already had your cell number, Logan. He showed it to me. He just wanted to know where you were staying." Logan looked at the carpet. "You didn't tell him." "I told him I didn't run a travel agency and he should leave or I'd call someone who'd make him leave." Another pause, this one with something in it. "You want to tell me what's going on?" He thought about how to answer that. "Not yet," he said. "I'm sorry, Gerald. Keep Ellen's hours normal. Don't change anything. I'll be back Friday." "Logan." Gerald's voice shifted. Not harder, just more direct. "Are you in trouble?" "No." "Are you sure?" He thought about a man in a suit asking questions about his itinerary in a small Portland bookstore. "I'll be careful," he said, which was not the same answer, and they both knew it. And Gerald let it go because he was 70 and had known Logan long enough to understand when pushing would help and when it wouldn't. He hung up and sat in the quiet. Sienna had gone back to her secured office space after he'd received the call, saying she needed to work, and he had walked her to the lobby of the building and then stood outside for a while in the Seattle drizzle, feeling the specific weight of being a person whose name was now on someone's list, for reasons that had started with a notebook left in a seat pocket. He should fly home. He knew that. He had no formal role in any of this. He had sent one email and sat in a hotel lounge for a night and listened and been present, and those things were decent human things to do, and also they were the full extent of what any reasonable person could argue he owed this situation. He went back inside and texted Sienna. Gerald confirmed. "The man had my cell number already. He was fishing for my hotel." She replied in under a minute. "I know who sent him. I'm sorry." Then, "Carr has a PI firm he uses for opposition research. They're very good at making things uncomfortable without crossing legal lines." Exactly. Then, after a pause, "You should go home tomorrow, Logan." He read that 3 times. Then he typed, "Tell me what you need for the next 48 hours. The response took longer this time. He imagined her on the other end of it, doing the thing she did where she ran calculations behind her eyes. The Meridian records. If they come back clean and complete, I have enough with what I already have to take to an outside securities attorney and file. If they come back incomplete or stalled, I need a different approach, and I need it fast, because the news cycle on this morning's article is going to prompt follow-up stories by end of week. How long before you know which way it goes? Tomorrow afternoon at the earliest, possibly Thursday morning." Logan looked at his return flight confirmation on the other tab of his phone. Friday morning. He had the time. "I'll stay," he typed. He put the phone down before he could second-guess it. The second news story ran the next morning. This one was sharper. It named a specific investor, a venture firm called Castlewood Capital, as having serious concerns about the foundation's financial structure, and quoted a Vela board member named Richard Okafor, saying that the board had repeatedly attempted to engage the CEO on governance questions without resolution. There was a sidebar with a timeline that was accurate in every fact and completely misleading in its framing, the way the most effective attacks usually are. Sienna sent it to Logan at 7:15 a.m. with no comment. He read it twice and then called her. "Okafor," he said when she picked up. "Is he part of this?" "He's not part of the fraud, he's just—" She stopped. "He genuinely believes the acquisition is the right move. He's not dishonest. He's just decided that the version of events Carr has been feeding him is more credible than mine." A beat. "That's almost harder, in a way. It would be easier if they were all just corrupt. How are you doing?" A pause, like the question caught her off guard. "I'm functional," she said. "That's not what I asked." Another pause. I'm tired, and I keep waiting to feel afraid, and instead I mostly just feel clear, like everything's been simplified. She seemed to consider that. Is that bad? I think it means you know what you're doing, Logan said, even if you're not sure how it ends. He heard her exhale. Meridian's compliance window is today, she said, shifting back to operational ground. I'll know by 3. Call me when you do. He spent the morning doing the things he had actually come to Seattle to do. A follow-up call with Phil Grantham about the consignment terms. An email to his contact at a small Pacific Northwest press about a new fiction title they were distributing. He walked 4 blocks to a used bookstore he'd been meaning to visit for 2 years. A place called Second Tide that smelled like every good used bookstore he'd ever been in, and spent an hour in the back looking at a shelf of neglected mid-century novels. He bought 3 paperbacks he didn't need and thought about how ordinary all of it was, and how strange it was to be inside an ordinary hour while also waiting for a compliance response from an accounting firm that might or might not have been compromised by a man stealing from investors. Clara called at noon. Don't say anything, he said when he answered. Maisie lost her second tooth, Clara said. She wants to know if the tooth fairy finds you when you're in a hotel or if she only comes to your house. Logan felt something in his chest go soft and a little aching, the specific feeling of missing your kid from a distance. Tell her the tooth fairy has a very good tracking system, he said. I told her that already. She asked me how. What did you say? I said probably the same way Santa works. She said Santa isn't real. A beat. She said it very matter-of-factly, by the way, not upset, just like we should be accurate. She's 7. She's your kid. He laughed despite everything. She seems fine, Clara said, her voice shifting a little. She misses you, but she's fine. How are you? I'm fine. You're doing the thing where you say fine and mean something else. Clara, I'm not pushing. I just want you to know that fine is not a full sentence. He stood on the sidewalk outside Second Tide with his bag of paperbacks and the Seattle drizzle doing its usual thing, and thought about his daughter pulling a tooth and asking about the logic of the tooth fairy, and about Rachel, who would have had an excellent answer to that question, and about the fact that he had been saying fine for 5 years as a way of not saying the actual thing. I met someone who makes me realize I've been doing the same things in the same order for a long time, he said. And I'm not sure that's been as good for me as I told myself it was. Clara was quiet for a moment. That's the most honest thing you've said to me in about 3 years. Don't make it weird. I'm not making it weird. I'm noting it. A pause. Is she good? He thought about it. She's real. She's not trying to be anything she's not. She's in the middle of something serious, and she's scared, and she doesn't pretend she isn't. He paused. She draws library sketches in a notebook on overnight flights. Library sketches. Because she grew up going to libraries with her mom. Clara was quiet again, longer this time. Logan, she said carefully. I know. I know, Clara. Okay, she said, and she let it go, because she was a good sister and she understood when he needed room. Sienna's call came at 3:22. Meridian sent the records, she said. Her voice had the particular quality of someone who has just confirmed something they already suspected and are still processing the fact of it. Good? Yes and no. He heard papers moving. They sent what I requested. It's complete, or it looks complete. I need to go through it carefully. But the covering email includes a note that says the account in question was recently flagged internally for compliance review, which means someone at Meridian already knows something is wrong, or someone told them to start a paper trail. Which interpretation do you lean toward? Both, maybe, which is a breath. Which is actually more useful to me than either one alone, because if Meridian's own compliance team has flagged this account, that's an independent data point. That's not just me making accusations, that's a third party. So you have what you need. I have most of what I need. I need tonight to go through all of it and build the actual case document, something a securities attorney can work from. Not just evidence, a narrative, context, timeline, the full picture. Do you have somewhere safe to do that? The office space. I'll stay late. I'll come. A pause on her end. You don't need to. I know. I'll bring food. Don't argue with me about it. She didn't argue. He showed up at the shared office at 6 with 2 paper bags from a Thai place 3 blocks away because he had asked the hotel concierge for a recommendation and specifically said not anywhere a business expense account would take someone, and the concierge had understood immediately. Sienna was so deep in the documents that she didn't look up when he came in. There were printed pages across the desk in an arrangement that clearly meant something to her. Both laptops were open. She had her hair down, he noticed. The ponytail had come out at some point, probably unconsciously, the way people let their armor loosen when they think no one's watching. He set a container in front of her without comment. She looked at it, then at him. Pad see ew? Is that okay? She pulled it toward her and opened it. That's my order. How did you I guessed. You seem like a pad see ew person. She looked at him with an expression he was starting to recognize, the one that was trying not to show that something small had landed. Thank you, she said. They ate in a working quiet, the kind that isn't awkward because both people have something to do. Logan had brought one of his second-tied paperbacks and read while she worked, which felt right. A bookstore manager sitting with a book in the corner while the person who needed to concentrate concentrated. Around 8 o'clock, she said without looking up, "The amount is larger than I thought." He lowered his book. How much larger? She told him. He put the book down entirely. Carr's been running this for at least 3 years, she said. The shell entity was set up 14 months before I came on as CEO. He brought me in. He was one of the people who recruited me, which means he spent 3 years building a company around a CEO who would be credible enough to attract serious capital and then planned to close the acquisition before anyone found what he'd been doing. She said it with a flatness that was more unsettling than anger would have been. I was useful to him. My integrity was useful to him. The foundation was useful to him. It made me look good, which made the company look good, which kept the valuation where he needed it. Logan looked at her. He couldn't have known you'd actually fight the acquisition. No. She finally looked up. I think he expected me to care about the outcome for the company. He didn't expect me to care more about... She gestured vaguely at the notebook on the corner of the desk. He underestimated that part. He thought he knew what you were. He thought he'd bought what I was. She looked back at the documents. He was wrong about that. She said it quietly, not as a declaration, just as a fact she had arrived at and was sitting with. Logan thought about the men in the airport, about the PI asking questions at a bookstore in Portland, about the news stories, the timeline built from accurate facts to point in the wrong direction, the deliberate, patient architecture of someone who had been doing this for a long time and was very good at it. He's going to come at you harder, Logan said, when he figures out you have this. I know. When does your attorney contact you back? She called at 5. She can meet Thursday morning. Then you have tonight and tomorrow to finish this. He leaned forward. What do you still need? She looked at the papers spread across the desk. The narrative document, the full case, in order, with references. Something that makes the pattern clear even to someone who isn't a forensic accountant. I can help with that. She looked at him. I'm an editor, he said. Former. I know how to build a document that makes a complicated thing legible. A moment of quiet. Yes, she said. That would actually help. Then tell me where to start. They worked until past 11. It wasn't glamorous. It was the specific grind of assembling evidence into argument, her explaining the financial structure in terms that assumed expertise he didn't have, him asking the questions a non-expert would ask until the explanation was clear enough to write down. Her pointing at a transaction and saying, this is the connection, and him saying, walk me back to why that matters until they found the version of it that didn't require a finance degree to follow. Around 10, Logan's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Mr. Pierce, you should consider whether this situation is worth the risk to your personal circumstances. You have a daughter to think about. He stared at it. Sienna was watching him. She read his face and said, What? He turned the phone to show her. Her expression went through several things in quick succession: alarm, fury, and then something that settled into a coldness he hadn't seen from her before. "That's a threat," she said. "It's a suggestion." "It's a threat framed as a suggestion. That's what they do." She stood up. "Logan, I need you to take that seriously. You have Maisie." "I know I have Maisie. I mean," she stopped. "I mean, you should think about this. Really think. They're not going to harm anyone. That's not what this is. But they will make your life uncomfortable. They'll call your employer. They'll look into your finances. I know what they'll do," he said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "I've been thinking about it since yesterday when Gerald called." "And?" He turned the phone face down on the desk. "I have a daughter who told me I always say no to things," he said. "And I have been thinking about that for a month. And I'm sitting across from someone who is trying to protect 600 jobs and a foundation built for kids like she was. And there's a man who has been stealing from people for 3 years and is trying to keep doing it." He paused. "I'm not leaving." Sienna looked at him for a long moment. "You're a strange person," she said, not critically, the other way. "I manage a bookstore," he said. "I'm the least strange person in this room." "You think I'm strange." "I think you're someone who became a billionaire to build libraries and then seemed surprised that it didn't make everything easier." She looked at him. Something in her face did the thing again. The armor shifting, the person underneath it briefly visible. "Nobody has ever said it that simply," she said. "That's because everyone in your world is trying to be sophisticated about it." She looked away toward the window. The parking structure was dark, just the dim orange of security lights. "My mother would have liked you," she said quietly. He didn't know what to do with that, so he just said, "Is she died 4 years ago, before any of this was—" She gestured at the room, "before it was what it is." A pause. "She never saw the company. She never knew what it became." "She knew you." Sienna didn't answer, but something in her posture changed slightly, the way it does when something hits the right spot and a person doesn't quite want to show it. Logan looked back at the documents. "The third transaction," he said. "Walk me through it again. I want to get the language right." She sat back down. They worked. At 11:30, they called it for the night. The narrative document was 60% complete, structured, clear, the kind of thing that told a story anyone could follow. Logan walked Sienna to the lobby, where she had a rideshare waiting. The rain had stopped. The Seattle streets were wet and reflective, the way they get after, the lights doubling in the pavement. "Get some sleep," he said. "You too." She paused at the door. "Logan, about the text. I'm calling Clara tonight. She and Maisie will stay at my sister's place until I'm home, just as a precaution." He said it the way you say things you've already decided. "Maisie will think it's a sleepover. She loves my sister's house." Sienna looked at him. He could see her doing the math on that, on what it meant that he'd already worked it out, already made peace with the disruption, already decided. "I'm going to fix this," she said. "All of it." "I know," he said. And the strange thing was that he meant it. Not as encouragement, not as the polite thing you say. He meant it the way you mean things you have watched someone earn the right to say about themselves. She got into the car. He stood on the wet sidewalk and watched the taillights go, and then took out his phone and called his sister, who answered on the third ring and listened without interrupting while he explained briefly what he needed and why, and when he was done, she said, "Maisie's going to ask a lot of questions." "Tell her it's an adventure," he said. "She's going to want the real answer eventually." "I know," Logan said. "I'll give it to her when I'm home." He put his phone away and started walking back to the hotel, alone in the quiet city. A man who had come to Seattle to talk about books and had stayed for something else entirely. He didn't feel afraid. That surprised him, a little. He just felt like himself, not the careful, small version, the full one. The one he'd apparently been holding in reserve for years without knowing it was still there. He walked back through the wet streets and let the air in. Thursday morning came in gray and cold, the kind of Seattle morning that feels like the city is conserving energy. Logan woke at 6 without an alarm, which was becoming a pattern. He lay there for a few minutes, running through the day. the attorney meeting at 9, the document they still needed to finish, the third news story that he was fairly certain was coming based on the way the previous two had been spaced. He had slept better than the nights before, which he attributed partly to exhaustion and partly to the specific relief of having made a decision and committed to it. Clara had texted at midnight. Maisie is asleep in the guest room. She thinks this is the best week of her life. She also wants me to tell you that Gerald the Moth is with her. He had smiled at that in the dark of the hotel room and felt the specific ache of it, the glad ache, the kind that reminds you what you're working for. He showered and dressed and called Sienna at 7:15. I'm already at the office space, she said. I've been here since 6. Did you sleep? 4 hours. It's enough. It's not enough. Logan. There was something in her voice, not irritation, more like the tone of someone who hasn't been checked on in a long time and doesn't quite know what to do with it. I'm fine. The document is nearly done. I need 2 more hours. I'll bring breakfast. You don't have to. I know. 2 hours. Don't finish it without me. He brought bagels from a place the hotel's breakfast attendant recommended, which turned out to be one of those small decisions that matters more than it should because it's ordinary and human in a week that had been neither. When he walked in, Sienna had the document open on screen and printed pages side by side, and the particular focused stillness of someone who had been alone with a hard problem and was close to the other side of it. She looked up, registered the bag, and said, "You actually brought bagels." I said I would. People say things. I noticed you hadn't updated your priors on that yet, he said, and she looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between surprised and wry and reached for the bag. They worked through breakfast. Logan read the sections she had written overnight and found places where the language tilted too technical, too insider, the kind of writing that made sense if you already understood the context and fell apart if you didn't. He flagged them and rewrote them in the margins, not changing the facts, just the entry points. The way you edit a complicated thing to make it accessible without making it smaller. She watched him do it once, then let him work. At 8:40, she printed the final version, stacked the pages, and set them on the desk. They both looked at it. Is it enough? Logan said. It should be. She straightened the stack. It's not perfect. There are 2 transactions I can contextualize but not fully document. The attorney will tell me if that's a problem. What's your gut? My gut says it's enough to open an investigation that will find the rest. She picked up her coffee cup. Empty, he noticed, had been for a while. Investigations have subpoena power. I don't. He took the empty cup and refilled it from the machine in the corner without asking. She accepted it the same way, without comment, and he thought, this is what comfortable looks like. Not the absence of difficulty, just 2 people who have stopped performing around each other. Let's go, he said. The attorney's name was Diane Yee, and she worked out of a small firm on the 14th floor of a building downtown that smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee, which Logan found reassuring in a way he couldn't fully articulate. Expensive firms smelled like neutrality. This one smelled like work. Diane was 42, sharp-faced, and had the manner of someone who had heard a great many stories and had learned to identify which ones were real by the quality of the silences in them. She shook Sienna's hand and then Logan's, looked at him briefly, and said to Sienna, "This is your—" "He helped build the document," Sienna said. "He's not involved in the company." Diane absorbed that without pursuing it. They sat across from her and Sienna walked her through it. Logan had heard the full version twice now, but he listened again, watching Diane's face, and what he saw there was the thing he had hoped to see. Not skepticism dissolving into belief, but a person following a thread and finding it holding. Diane asked questions. Good ones. The kind that pushed on the weak joints of the argument, and when Sienna answered them, steadily with specifics, Diane made small notes and moved on. At the end, she sat back and was quiet for a moment. The meridian flag is significant, she said. That's independent corroboration of the pattern you're describing. Without that, this is a CEO fighting her board, which is a story I hear often and which is frequently messier than either side presents. With that, it's something else. Is it enough to file? Sienna said. It's enough to file a formal complaint with the SEC and to initiate a parallel civil action against Carr personally. Diane tapped her pen against her pad. The criminal referral would come from the SEC after their investigation. That's not in your hands. Timeline. Filing this week. The SEC has mandatory response protocols. They have to acknowledge and assign within 10 business days. After that, it depends on how they prioritize it. But given the amounts involved in the Meridian flag, I'd expect them to move. A pause. In the meantime, your board will find out you've filed. That's unavoidable. I know. They will call an emergency shareholders meeting. They may attempt to remove you as CEO before the investigation has run its course. They have the votes to do it if 3 board members align. I know that too. Do you have a response to that scenario? Sienna looked at her hands for a moment. Then she said, I'm not going to fight the removal. If they vote me out, I accept it and step aside. Logan looked at her. The company's stability matters more than my position, she said. If my being there is the thing causing the disruption, then removing the disruption is the right call for the 600 people who work there. She said it firmly, but there was something underneath the firmness. Not resignation, something harder than that. But I'm filing. Whatever they do after, I'm filing. Diane looked at her for a long moment. I'll have the paperwork ready by end of day, she said. On. They walked out into the mid-morning and stood on the sidewalk. The rain had held off. The sky was that particular Seattle gray that wasn't threatening, just present. A permanent consideration rather than an emergency. Sienna let out a breath. How do you feel? Logan asked. Like I just jumped off something and I'm still deciding whether I'm falling or flying. She looked up at the buildings. Both, maybe. Both sounds right. She turned to look at him. You know what the worst part is. What? Carr probably thinks he was doing rational things. Every step of it. The misrouted funds, the acquisition play, sending that man to your bookstore. He was just running a calculation. He does this because the calculation works, not because he's... She stopped. He's not a monster. He's just a person who decided other people's money and other people's work were resources to be positioned. That might be worse than a monster, Logan said. Yeah. She looked back at the street. My CFO called me this morning, Marcus, the first person I hired. He said he's behind me regardless of what the board does. A pause. He told me he should have said something earlier when he noticed things didn't add up. He said he was scared. What did you tell him? I told him saying something now is what matters. She was quiet for a moment. I think I meant it. Logan thought about that, about Marcus, who wasn't malicious, just not brave, who had woken up on a Thursday morning and decided to be something different. About the ordinary quality of that decision, how it doesn't announce itself, how it just arrives, and you either answer it or you don't. You did the same thing, he said. 6 weeks ago, when you started building the case, you were scared too. I'm still scared. That's not the part that counts. She looked at him with an expression he had seen pieces of over these 4 days, but not all at once. Something open and direct and a little raw. The look of someone who has been managing their own interior for so long that being genuinely seen by someone is disorienting in a way that's not entirely unpleasant. She looked away first. I want to meet her, she said. Maisie, if that's... She stopped. That might be a strange thing to say. It's not strange. She seemed to be choosing words carefully. She sounds like someone worth knowing, and I don't meet a lot of people worth knowing. Logan thought about his daughter at Clara's house, missing a tooth and sleeping with a stuffed moth, asking about the logic of the tooth fairy. She'd have questions for you, he said. Probably hard ones. Definitely hard ones. He paused. She asked me last month why some people have lots of money, and some people don't have enough, and whether that was fair. I was in the middle of making dinner, and I did not have a good answer. Sienna was quiet for a moment. What did you say? I said it wasn't fair, and that the best thing people could do was pay attention to it and not look away. He paused. She said, okay, but that doesn't fix it. And I said, no, but it's where fixing it starts. Sienna was very still. She'd ask me the same thing, she said quietly, and I'd want to tell her about the foundation, about the libraries. A pause. I'd want to actually have an answer. You do have an answer. I want a better one. She said it like someone setting a goal, not like someone diminishing what they had. I want to be able to look a 7-year-old in the face and show her, not just tell her. Logan looked at the sidewalk, then back up. Then finish it, he said. File the papers. Whatever the board does, whatever the story looks like next week, finish it and build the thing you were building. She nodded. Once. The small, decided nod of someone who was already there, just needed to hear it from outside their own head. The third news story ran at 2 in the afternoon. It was worse than the previous two. It questioned whether the foundation had ever been intended as anything other than a personal tax vehicle, quoted 2 more unnamed board sources, and carried a headline that used the word questions in a way designed to imply answers. A financial news aggregator picked it up and ran a condensed version under an even sharper header. By 3 o'clock, it was being shared by people who had no stake in Vela but enjoyed the architecture of a public fall. Sienna's phone went quiet in the way phones go quiet when everyone is watching before they decide what side to be on. Her publicist called. Her PR team sent a draft statement that was carefully worded to say nothing. 2 board members called and left voicemails she didn't return. Marcus texted her a single line. We're still here. She showed Logan the screen. He noticed she'd been holding the phone with both hands, the way she had held the notebook on the plane. Let them run it, he said. 1 more day and you file. After you file, the story changes. It gets harder before it gets easier. Yes, the staff are going to be frightened. Some of them, yes. I should talk to them before the filing is public. She was already shifting mode, not the person sitting on a sidewalk feeling the weight of a jump, but the person who had decided and was now working. A company-wide message, something that doesn't tip off the board or compromise the filing, but that tells the people who work there that the ground is still solid. Do you want help drafting it? Please. They went back to the office space and sat across from each other and worked on it, Logan asking, what do you actually want them to know? And Sienna working through it. Not the PR version, not the carefully managed version, but what she would say to Marcus if it were just the 2 of them. The message that came out of it was short. 3 paragraphs. It said that she was aware of the news coverage, that she had taken actions to address governance concerns through proper legal channels, that she could not detail the specifics while that process was active, and that the company's mission was unchanged and its people were its foundation. It did not mention Carr. It did not mention the fraud. It did not promise outcomes she couldn't guarantee. It was honest in all the ways that mattered and silent in all the ways that were necessary. The last line, Logan said, reading it back. You wrote, I believe in what we've built. Can you say something more specific? She thought. I believe in what you've built. You and Marcus and the people who said yes when it would have been easier to say no. He typed it in. She read it. That's it, she said quietly. She sent it at 4:15. By 4:45, Marcus had forwarded it to the company Slack with a single word underneath. This. 47 employees responded within the hour. Not all of them, not even most, but enough, the particular enough that signals that something has held. Logan's flight home was Friday morning at 9. Thursday evening, they walked 6 blocks to a restaurant Sienna had been to once before, 3 years ago, back when Seattle had been a place she visited rather than a city she was currently hiding in. It was the kind of place that was busy without being loud. Wooden tables, good lighting, the particular sound of a room where people were having real conversations. They ordered without performing at it. They talked without it being managed. Sienna told him about the early days of Vela, the shared office and the lunch smells, and a week where she had genuinely not known if they would make payroll, and how Marcus had come in that Monday anyway and brought coffee and not mentioned it, and how she had thought, this is the kind of person you build something with. Logan told her about the year after Rachel, not the surface version, not it was hard and Maisie helped me through it, the actual version. The nights when Maisie was asleep and the apartment was quiet, and he had sat in the kitchen and felt the particular weight of a future that wasn't what he had planned. How he had rebuilt around a smaller radius because the smaller radius felt survivable. How Halcyon Books had been, honestly, more than a job. It had been a structure he could hold on to while the rest of him found its footing. Sienna listened the way she did when she was really listening. Not waiting for her turn, not managing the emotional tenor of it, just present. You said she had dark eyes, Sienna said when he'd been quiet for a moment. Yeah. Maisie has them too? Same exact shade. Sometimes I'm looking at her and for a second, he stopped. It's not painful the way it used to be. It's more like she carried something forward, like the good parts got inherited. Sienna was quiet. I don't think I've let anyone in since Rachel, he said. He said it looking at the table, and then he made himself look up. I've been telling myself it was for Maisie's sake. Keep things stable. Keep the radius small. But that was... He paused. That was me, mostly. Maisie's fine. She told me I always say no to things, and she wasn't wrong. Sienna held his gaze. You didn't say no to this? She said. No, he exhaled. I didn't. The silence between them had a different quality than the working silences of the past 4 days. Less practical, more exposed. The kind of quiet where both people know something is present and are deciding whether to name it. I'm going to be in the middle of something very loud for a while, Sienna said carefully. After the filing goes through, the board, the media, the investigation, it's going to be loud. I know. I'm not saying that as a way of... She stopped, chose different words. I don't want to pull you into something that disrupts what you've built. You have a life, a real one. Maisie, the store? Clara? She paused. I don't want to be a person who makes your life more complicated. Logan looked at her. I run a bookstore, he said. My life is not fragile. That's not... I know what you're doing. You're giving me an out. She didn't deny it. I've been giving myself outs for 5 years, he said. I've gotten pretty good at taking them. He put his coffee cup down. I don't want this one. She looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay, he said back. They finished their dinner and walked back through the wet Seattle streets and stood outside the hotel where they had started 3 nights ago in a lounge with stale coffee and 2 laptops and something neither of them had named yet. I'll call you when the filing goes through, she said. I know you will. Logan. She looked at him directly. Not the CEO, not the person managing her public presentation. Just a woman who had been scared on a plane and had a notebook full of drawings and had, somewhere in the past 4 days, decided he was someone she could be honest around. Thank you for all of it. The email and the document and the bagels and... She gestured, a small motion that meant everything else. All of it. He wanted to say something small and deflective, the way he usually did. He said instead, Come to Portland when this is done. Maisie wants to meet you, and I want to show you Halcyon. She looked at him. A bookstore, she said. A good one. You'd show me a bookstore. I'd show you mine, he said. That's different. She was quiet for a second, and then she smiled. Not the careful one, not the one that was half armor, the real one. The one that reached her eyes and changed her whole face. Yes, she said. I'd like that. He watched her walk to the elevator. He stood alone in the lobby of a hotel in Seattle, a man with a flight to catch in the morning, and a daughter who had saved a tooth for him and a life that had, over the course of 4 unremarkable and completely remarkable days, quietly expanded back to the size it was supposed to be. He took the stairs up to his room. He packed his bag. He slept. He landed in Portland at 10:47 Friday morning. Clara was waiting at arrivals with Maisie, which he hadn't expected. He'd told them he'd take a ride share, and the sight of his daughter standing at the barrier with her hair in 2 uneven pigtails and a gap in her smile where the tooth had been hit him somewhere in the sternum in a way that was specific to parenthood, the particular force of returning to the thing you love most after being away from it. Maisie saw him and said, Daddy, with the simple factual certainty of a person who has not yet learned to be cool about things, and crossed the distance between them at a run. He dropped his bag and caught her. She smelled like the strawberry shampoo Clara bought, and something else, cereal maybe, and she weighed exactly the right amount in his arms, and he held on for a few extra seconds before she squirmed and pulled back and said, I have a hole in my mouth. Look. She opened her mouth wide and pointed at the gap with one finger. I see that, he said. Very impressive. The tooth fairy came to Aunt Clara's house, she said. So you were right about the tracking. I'm right about a lot of things. You always say that, but you said Thursday was Friday last week. Clara, arriving beside them, said to Logan, "She has your memory for details." And then, more quietly, just to him, "You okay?" "Yeah," he said, and meant it. They drove back to the apartment through the gray Portland morning, Maisie narrating from the back seat. 3 days at Clara's had produced a remarkable volume of events to report. She had found a spider in the bathroom that Clara made her release outside. She had watched a movie about a dog that made Clara cry, but not Maisie, which Maisie found confusing. She had decided that moths were still superior to butterflies, but she was willing to admit that some butterflies were okay. Logan listened to all of it with his elbow on the window and the familiar streets going by and the specific deep exhale of being home. That evening, after dinner, after Maisie was in bed and Clara had gone, and the apartment was the quiet particular to an end of day with a child in it, Logan sat at the kitchen table and thought about Sienna. He had not heard from her since his flight. He knew that meant she was in it. The filing, the board response, the noise. He had checked his phone twice at the airport and then told himself to stop checking because there was nothing he could do from Portland except wait, which was its own kind of hard for a person who had spent 4 days being useful. At 9:40, his phone buzzed. "It's filed." Diane submitted at 4 p.m. Carr's attorney called her within the hour. He typed back, "How are you?" "Honestly, like I just set something in motion that I can't stop," which is exactly what I intended. So, that's the right feeling. Logan. The board called an emergency meeting for Monday. Diane says they'll likely move to suspend me pending review. He looked at that for a moment. "Will you fight it?" "No. I told Diane I won't contest it. If they suspend me, I step aside. The company needs to function." A pause, then, "But the filing stands. Whatever they do to my title, the filing stands." He typed, "You're doing the right thing." Her response came after a minute. "I know, it's just, you know that thing where doing the right thing and it feeling good are not always the same moment?" "Yeah," he typed. "I know that thing." Another pause, then, "Thank you for everything. I mean it, all of it." He looked at the message for a moment, then he typed back, "Portland. When you're through the worst of this." "I meant what I said." Her response was simple. "I know you did." He put the phone down and sat in the quiet kitchen of his small Portland apartment and thought about the gap between doing a hard thing and the part where it resolves. About how most of life is spent in that gap, and how the people who make it through are not usually the ones who found a shortcut, but the ones who just kept going long enough. The next 3 months were, by any honest account, difficult for Sienna Hart. The board suspended her on Monday, as predicted. The vote was 4-2, with Marcus's former ally Richard Okafor casting the deciding vote with visible discomfort, which Sienna later described to Logan as being almost more frustrating than if he'd done it happily. The fourth news story ran the same day, then a fifth. A financial podcast dedicated an episode to it under the title Founder Syndrome, When Vision Becomes Liability. 2 investors pulled their positions. The acquisition group issued a statement calling the legal filing a distraction and indicating they were reviewing their offer. For 2 weeks, it looked, to everyone watching from outside, like it might go the way these things often go. The board consolidating power, the dissenting CEO isolated, the story simplified into something that fit a familiar template. Then the SEC assigned an investigator. Then Meridian Accounting Group, facing their own compliance exposure, voluntarily submitted a supplementary filing that corroborated the pattern of misrouted funds and added 2 transactions that Sienna hadn't known about. Then an anonymous Vela employee submitted a whistleblower complaint through a separate channel, citing internal pressure to backdate financial records. A complaint that had nothing to do with Sienna's filing and was filed by someone who had simply decided that being not brave long enough had a cost they were no longer willing to pay. Douglas Carr resigned from the board on a Tuesday morning 6 weeks after the filing, with a statement that cited personal reasons and was believed by no one. 2 of the board members he had installed followed within the week. The acquisition group withdrew their offer 3 days after that, citing the changed board composition and legal uncertainty, which was the corporate equivalent of leaving when the lights come on. The emergency shareholder meeting that was supposed to formalize Sienna's removal was postponed, then postponed again. then quietly converted into a governance review meeting at which the remaining board, including Richard Okafor, who had apparently had several weeks of uncomfortable reflection about the deciding vote he had cast, voted to reinstate Sienna as CEO, pending the SEC's formal review, with a resolution acknowledging her role in bringing the misconduct to light. She called Logan from the parking lot of the Vela office building immediately after that meeting. "They reinstated me," she said. "I know, Marcus texted me." A pause. "Marcus texted you?" "He has my number from when I helped with the document. He's been giving me updates." Logan was in the back of the bookstore when he answered, restocking a shelf, and he sat down on the small step stool Gerald kept back there. "How do you feel?" "Strange," she said. "Like I expected it to feel more like winning, and it mostly just feels like—" She paused. "Like the beginning of a lot of work." "That's because it is." "Yeah." A breath. "The foundation is intact. That was the thing I kept coming back to through all of this. The libraries. Carr tried to use them as evidence against me, and instead they became—" She stopped. "People responded to them. When the story came out about what they actually were, regular people, not investors, not industry, just people who read about what I was trying to build and wrote in to say—" Her voice changed slightly. "Some of them were people who grew up with libraries the way I did, who understood what that meant." Logan thought about his daughter, about the back corner reading nook at Halcyon that the neighborhood kids had colonized, about the way Gerald had built a store that felt like something other than commerce. "People know the real thing when they see it," he said. "I'm starting to believe that," Sienna said. "I'm starting to actually believe that." There was a quiet on the line that was warm rather than empty. "Portland," he said. "Are you ready for Portland?" She laughed. "The real one, not the managed one. Give me 2 weeks. I have some things to finish here." "Take 3, he said. "We're not going anywhere." She came on a Saturday in late November. Logan had told Maisie that a friend was visiting, someone he'd met on a trip to Seattle, and Maisie had received this information with the particular measured response of a child who was gathering data before committing to a position. "Is she nice?" Maisie asked at breakfast. "She's very direct," Logan said. "You'll probably like her." Maisie considered this. "Does she like moths?" "I honestly don't know." "I'll ask her." "That seems like a good plan." Sienna arrived at 11 in a car she'd driven herself. No driver, no security, just a woman in jeans and a dark jacket with her hair down and the leather notebook tucked under her arm out of what Logan had come to understand was pure habit. She looked different from the woman in the airport, less armored, or maybe he just knew what was underneath it now and couldn't unsee it. She stood at the door of his apartment and looked around. The bookshelves that covered most of one wall, the drawings Maisie had stuck to the refrigerator, the slightly battered furniture that was the furniture of a life actually being lived in. And something in her face did the thing he had watched it do a dozen times now, the thing where the CEO armor wasn't relevant anymore, and there was just a person standing in the doorway of someone else's life, trying to figure out if she fit. "It looks like you," she said. He stood aside to let her in. Maisie appeared from the hallway with the measured curiosity of someone approaching a situation they have already theorized about. She was wearing socks with small owls on them and carrying a drawing she'd made the night before and didn't explain. She looked at Sienna. Sienna looked back. "Hi," Maisie said. "Hi," Sienna said. "I'm Sienna." "I know. My dad talks about you," Logan said. "I mentioned you were coming. He talks about you when he thinks I'm asleep," Maisie said, with the serenity of someone who considers accuracy more important than tact. "He was on the phone and he said, 'Sienna will figure it out,' and then he said your name 2 more times." Sienna looked at Logan. Logan looked at the ceiling briefly. "What's that?" Sienna asked, nodding at the drawing. Maisie held it up. It was a moth drawn in brown crayon with careful attention to the wing pattern, labeled Gerald in large, uneven letters across the top. "This is Gerald," Maisie said. "He's a moth. Most people draw butterflies, but moths are just as good. They come out at night so nobody pays attention, but that doesn't mean they're not there." Sienna was quiet for a second. "I think that's one of the truest things I've ever heard," she said. She said it simply, without performing it, and Maisie clearly registered the difference between that and an adult being condescending. Maisie handed her the drawing. "You can have it," she said, "if you want." Sienna took it with both hands, the same way she took things that mattered. She looked at it for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." Maisie looked at Logan. "Can we go to the bookstore now? You said we could go." "I said we could go this afternoon. It's almost afternoon. It's 11:15. That's almost noon. Noon is afternoon." Logan looked at Sienna. Sienna was looking at Maisie with an expression that was slightly stunned and very warm. "We can go," Logan said. "Let me get my coat." Bachan. Halcyon Books on a Saturday morning was one of Logan's favorite versions of the world. It was busy without being crowded. Regulars working their way through the sections, a couple in the back with coffee from the place next door that Gerald tolerated because they'd been doing it for 15 years. Two kids about Maisie's age who had clearly claimed the reading nook as their territory and were not inclined to negotiate about it. The smell of old paper and wood polish, and the particular quiet that exists inside a used bookstore, even when it's full of people. Gerald was behind the counter. He was a small man, white-haired, with the posture of someone who had spent decades reaching for high shelves, and the general demeanor of someone who had read enough books to find most situations familiar. He looked at Logan, and then at Sienna, and then at Logan again, with a glance that communicated approximately 17 things simultaneously. "This is Sienna," Logan said. "A friend." "Gerald Hatch," Gerald said. He shook her hand. "You're the reason he came home from Seattle looking like a person who'd remembered something important." "Gerald," Logan said. "I run a bookstore. I observe things." Sienna smiled. "He was helpful when I needed it." "That's his best quality," Gerald said. "He's also occasionally right about books." He turned back to Logan. "The Pemberton order came in, back shelf." And that was Gerald's version of blessing something, acknowledging it briefly and moving on. Logan understood. Sienna moved through the store with the curiosity of someone who loved this kind of place, which Logan had suspected and was glad to have confirmed. She ran her finger along a shelf of mid-century paperbacks. She stopped at a display of Pacific Northwest regional writing and picked up 3 things and read the backs. She found the children's section and stood there for a longer time than anywhere else, looking at the shelves with an expression Logan recognized. It was the expression from the notebook, the one she had when she was thinking about what she wanted to build. Maisie appeared at her elbow. "This section is good," she said, "but the geography is wrong. You should put the adventure books next to the animal books, not next to the beginning readers." "That's a strong opinion," Sienna said. "It makes more sense. If you like animal books, you might like adventure books. But if you're just learning to read, you're not going to go all the way to adventures yet." "You're right," Sienna said. "That's actually exactly the logic behind how libraries organize their collections." Maisie looked at her. "You know about libraries?" "A little," she paused. "I'm actually trying to build some." Maisie processed this. "Build them how? Like with books?" "With books and computers, and space for kids to come and think and make things." Sienna came down to Maisie's level slightly, not performing it, just making the conversation more direct. "Places where everything's free and nothing costs anything." "We had a library at school, but they cut the hours," Maisie said. "Now it's only open 2 days a week." Something crossed Sienna's face, quick and real. "I know," she said quietly. "That happens a lot. That's why I want to build more of them." Maisie was quiet for a moment, clearly running some internal assessment. "Okay," she said. "That's a good reason." She picked up a book from the shelf and handed it to Sienna. "This one's good. It's about a girl who builds a boat." Sienna took it. "Have you read it?" 3 times. She paused. "You can borrow it if you want. I trust you." Logan, standing near the door pretending to look at a display, heard all of this and had to face the wall for a moment. "What?" They spent 2 hours at the store. Sienna bought 4 books. Maisie made her promise to tell her what she thought of the boat-building one. Gerald shook her hand again on the way out and said, "Come back," which from Gerald was a significant endorsement. They walked down the block to the coffee place after, the 3 of them, Maisie between Logan and Sienna, and chattering about a recent injustice involving a group project at school where she had done most of the work, and another kid had presented it without mentioning her name. "What did you do?" Sienna asked. "I told the teacher. My dad says if something's not fair, you should say so." "Your dad's right." "He's right about some things," Maisie allowed. "He was wrong about Thursday being Friday." "That was one time," Logan said. "It's in the record." Sienna laughed. The full one, the one that reached her eyes. Logan watched his daughter and this woman walking down a Portland sidewalk on a gray November morning, Maisie's owl socks visible at the hem of her jeans, Sienna's leather notebook under her arm, and felt the specific quality of something arriving. Not dramatically, not with announcement, just the way important things often arrive. Quietly. In the middle of an ordinary Saturday, as if they had been patient enough to wait for exactly the right moment. The months that followed were not a fairy tale. Logan would be the first to say that, and he would mean it not as a caveat, but as something he valued. Sienna was in the middle of an SEC investigation that required her attention in unpredictable ways. She traveled. She had weeks that were consumed by legal proceedings and board restructuring and the work of rebuilding a company's credibility from the inside out, which turned out to be slower and less cinematic than anyone imagined. She and Logan existed in a rhythm that was sometimes interrupted by distance and schedule and the plain difficulty of two people building something while simultaneously managing everything else in their lives. They argued once about whether she was using work to avoid a harder conversation. She said she wasn't, he said he thought she might be, and they were both partly right, which they acknowledged 2 days later in a phone call where neither of them was graceful about it, but both were honest. Maisie went through a phase of being unsure about the change in her father's life. She didn't act out dramatically. She was too direct for that. She just asked questions that were harder than they sounded. Does Sienna like us more than her work? And if she goes away a lot, does that mean she'll go away forever? Logan answered each one as honestly as he could, which sometimes meant saying, "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out," which was the truest thing he had. Douglas Carr's criminal referral was formally filed by the SEC 7 months after Sienna's original complaint. His attorney issued a denial. The case would take time. It always took time. But the shape of it was established, the pattern documented, the evidence preserved by people who no longer looked the other way. 2 of the board members who had been installed by Carr resigned permanently. Richard Okafor stayed and slowly demonstrated by his actions over the following year that the deciding vote he had cast had genuinely troubled him. He became, unexpectedly, one of the more useful people in the room when the hard conversations happened. Marcus, the first hire, was promoted to COO. He sent Logan a short email when it was announced that said, "None of this happens without you and that email to Meridian. I know you know that. I just wanted to say it." Logan read it at the bookstore's back desk and then went back to restocking the shelf, which was the right response. The foundation work moved faster than anyone expected. Sienna had been quietly building the infrastructure for it for years before the crisis forced it into the open, which meant that when the dust settled, the groundwork was already laid. The first community library opened in a neighborhood outside of Portland, not Sienna's choice of location, not a strategic one, but the response to a letter from an elementary school librarian who had written to the foundation's email address explaining that her school had lost its library funding 3 years ago, and the children who needed it most were the ones who had no alternative. Sienna had forwarded the letter to Logan one evening with no message except his name. He had written back, "You already know the answer." She had written back, "Yeah, I do." The opening was on a Thursday in April. The building was not large. It had been a disused community center, refurbished, the kind of renovation that was careful rather than impressive. Bookshelves that went floor to ceiling in the main room, computers on one side, a reading corner with low shelves and cushions that was clearly designed with children in mind, a small section of local history that the neighborhood association had contributed to. Sienna was there. Logan was there. Maisie had asked 3 times in the preceding week if she could come and had been told yes each time, and had still asked a 4th time, just to be sure. There were about 60 people in the room, kids from the school, parents, the librarian who had written the letter, a few community members, a photographer from the local paper. It was not a grand event. It was the right size for what it was. Maisie walked in and looked around at the shelves, the full shelves, the organized shelves, and then walked directly to the children's section and started reading the spines. Sienna stood near the entrance, watching. Logan stood beside her. "It's real," she said. Not triumphantly, just noting the fact of it, the way you note something you've been carrying as an idea for so long that its physical existence still surprises you. "It's the first one," he said. 11 more in planning." She looked at the room. 20 after that, if the Foundation's second funding round comes through. A pause. "It's going to take years." "I know. It's going to be incremental and imperfect, and there will be funding gaps and political complications and Sienna." She looked at him. "Look at the room," he said. She did. In the corner, Maisie had found a girl about her age and was pointing to a book on the shelf and explaining something with considerable conviction. The girl was listening. A woman Logan didn't know was standing at the local history section, holding a photograph from the archive display with both hands, the way people hold things that are personal. The librarian was talking to 3 parents near the circulation desk, and something she was saying was making them laugh. The room was full of people living in it. That was all. That was enough. That was exactly the thing. Sienna exhaled, long and slow and all the way out. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay," he said. They stood together in the doorway of something that had started as a sketch in a leather notebook on a flight that hit unexpected turbulence, in the seat beside a man with a broken carry-on wheel and a jam stain on his cuff, and had made its slow, difficult, very human way to this room, these shelves, these people. He asked her on a Saturday in May, 14 months after Seattle. He had not planned a speech. He had thought about planning one and then decided against it because speeches were the managed version of things, and Sienna had spent enough of her life in the managed version. He had bought a ring because that seemed like the right gesture, and also because Maisie had been extremely helpful in the selection process, having strong opinions about what constituted appropriate ring aesthetics for someone who drew buildings and notebooks. They were at the apartment. Maisie was in the other room, conspicuously quiet in the way she got when she was paying close attention while pretending not to. Sienna was sitting at the kitchen table reading through Foundation documents, which was where she often ended up on weekend mornings, and Logan set a cup of coffee in front of her, the way he had been setting coffee in front of her since a Seattle hotel lounge in October. And then instead of sitting across from her, he stayed standing and said her name. She looked up. He had the ring. She looked at it, then at him. "I'm not good at speeches," he said. "I know. And I'm still a person who sometimes says no to things. I'm working on it, but I'm not fixed." "Logan, and your life is complicated and mine is small, and they don't look the same from outside, and there are going to be people who don't understand why this makes sense. Logan." He stopped. "I know all of that," she said. She was looking at him with the expression he had come to understand was her real face, the one underneath everything. Not the CEO, not the person managing the room, just Sienna, who had grown up in libraries and drawn buildings and notebooks and held on to things that mattered with both hands. "I have known all of that." "Okay," he said. Then, "Yes," she said. He hadn't finished the question. "You were getting to yes," she said. "I know. I was going to ask it more formally." "Ask it." He looked at her. "Will you marry me?" he said. "Yes," she said, for the second time. "Obviously, yes." From the other room, Maisie said loudly, "She said yes!" Sienna looked at the hallway, then at Logan. "She was listening," Logan said. "Obviously she was listening," Sienna said, and laughed. And that was the moment. Not the ring, not the question, not the yes. That was the moment Logan thought of, later, when he tried to identify exactly when he understood that this was going to be all right. Sienna sitting at his kitchen table laughing at the fact that a 7-year-old had been eavesdropping on his proposal, completely unguarded, completely herself, completely home. Maisie appeared in the doorway in her owl socks. "I knew you were going to say yes," she told Sienna. "You did, huh?" "I told Gerald." She nodded toward her room, where the stuffed moth presumably resided. I said, "Probably yes." "Probably," Sienna repeated. I didn't want to be overconfident. Maisie looked at the ring, then at her father, then at Sienna, with the comprehensive gaze of a child conducting a final assessment. Then she nodded once, the way Logan sometimes nodded. A considered nod, the kind that meant a decision had been arrived at and would stand. "Okay," she said. "Good." And she turned around and went back to her room. People would ask Sienna later, at events, at interviews, at the kind of professional gatherings where someone eventually asks the personal question, what it had felt like to go through what she had gone through. The board fight, the suspension, the public narrative that had run against her for weeks before the truth found its footing. She always gave an honest answer, which was that it had been harder than she expected and also clarifying in a way she hadn't anticipated. That you learn things in that kind of difficulty that you can't learn any other way. About who stays, about what you're actually made of, about the distance between the life you present and the life you're living. And sometimes, if the question was sincere and the room was right, she said this: the smartest decision she had made in 4 years of running a company was not a business decision. It was missing her driver, ending up on the wrong flight, and sitting next to a man who had no reason to run after a stranger in an airport, but ran anyway. Who had no stake in her world and stayed anyway. Who brought bagels and helped build a document and made her say out loud the things she was afraid to say, which is that she knew what she was doing and she was going to do it regardless. She said, success without someone to share it with is a metric, not a life. She said, the things she had been building toward, the libraries, the foundation, the rooms full of kids who didn't have to earn their access to knowledge, she had always been building it for people. And somewhere in a Portland apartment with bookshelves on every wall and owl socks on the floor and a drawing of a moth on the refrigerator, she had finally understood that people included her. That she was allowed to be inside the thing she was building, not just the one who built it. Logan, if you asked him, would give you a shorter answer, because that was his nature. He would say, Maisie told him he always said no to things, and he decided she was right, and he said yes to something, and the yes compounded. He would say, Rachel had given him a daughter who could look at the world without flinching, and that daughter had looked at him and told him the truth, and the truth was the kindest thing she could have done. He would say, there was nothing wrong with a small, careful life. He had needed it. It was the right thing for the time it occupied. But a small life was meant to be a shelter while you healed, not a sentence to serve indefinitely. He would say, if you pressed him, that the most important thing he had ever done was not the email to Meridian, not staying in Seattle, not the document that helped build the case. It was going back for the notebook. Not because it changed everything. It did, but that's not the reason. Because at the moment he made that choice, he had no idea it would change anything. He just thought someone had left behind something that mattered to them, and he could either walk on or turn around. And turning around cost him nothing except a little inconvenience. That's the thing about the moments that matter, he would say. They don't arrive with weight. They arrive looking like small decisions, the kind where nothing is asking you to be heroic. Nothing is requiring you to transform. You just have to be willing to notice that something is worth a little extra effort. The rest of it follows from that. That first library opened in April. The second one opened in September, 3 blocks from an elementary school in a neighborhood that had never had a public reading space. The third one opened in January, and Maisie attended the ribbon cutting and inspected the children's section and gave her assessment, which was that the adventure books were correctly located this time. On an afternoon in early spring, surrounded by kids running their fingers along shelves, and a librarian explaining the catalog system and the smell of new books in a just-opened room, Sienna sat at a reading table and opened her leather notebook. The same one, worn even softer now, the cover dark from years of handling, and looked at the sketches she had made on overnight flights. Buildings, rooms, shelves going floor to ceiling, they looked exactly like what she was sitting inside. She closed the notebook and looked up. Logan was standing near the door watching her. She had told him once, in the office space in Seattle, with 2 laptops open and the case document half finished, that she didn't meet a lot of people worth knowing. He had taken that seriously, as he took most things she said. He had shown her, slowly and imperfectly, and without any grand declaration, what it looked like to be worth knowing. Not perfect, not heroic, Just present, just honest, just a man who turned around in an airport because a notebook looked like it mattered to someone, and that had been enough to begin. She held his gaze across the room. He tilted his head slightly. You okay? She nodded. Yeah. Outside the window, Portland in the early spring, the way it gets when the gray finally lifts and the light comes back in a way that feels earned. Inside, a room full of people at the beginning of something. The family that neither of them had planned for, and both of them had needed, and only found because they had learned, separately and together and the hard way, that the life you're supposed to build is usually waiting just past the edge of the one you decided was safe enough. It is enough. It is more than enough. It is, in the end, everything.